All right. Well, good morning. Good to see you. So go ahead and open up to Luke chapter 19. That's where we'll be headed today. The story is probably a familiar one to you. If you grew up in church, you likely heard this when you were a child. You sang a song to it. It's about a kid, not a kid, he was the size of a kid. He was a man named Zacchaeus. It's got to be rough to be known as a wee little man for like generations. I don't know how it works when we get to heaven, how much we're going to transfer from our culture to theirs, but it's got to be weird for Zacchaeus. Every time somebody shows up, they're like, "Oh, you're the wee little man." He said, "How many people are calling me that?" If you don't know that song, then this is a weird conversation, so it's all right. You can go YouTube it later. Let me read Zacchaeus 19, verses 1 through 10. This is the story. He entered through Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. "He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Let's pray. God, this is your story. And these are your words. You were the one who was there walking those streets. Your eyes saw Zacchaeus, and he exists with you now in eternity. So show us what we need to see. Reveal to our hearts what needs to be true about us based on your interaction with this man. Do so with me as well. Don't let any of us escape the beauty of grace this morning. So let me pray. Amen. So Zacchaeus, this is a loose depiction of him in a tree. And we're just going to leave that up there so you can process that for a while. But I want you to have the right context for this story, all right? So I don't know, how many of you have, you don't have to raise your hand or anything because it might be embarrassing, but some of you have felt like you didn't belong because you weren't big enough. Like you felt too short. This sounds weird, but this was my story of my childhood. I was the third of three brothers. I ended up tall, but I didn't start that way. So I started off smaller than my two older brothers. So I was always the one getting blocked in basketball and being bested in whatever sort of physical activity, which now is totally different. But then it was me getting beat up. So my two favorite characters growing up were David and Zacchaeus, because I was the little one. And these guys were little, but they did great things because God is good. And I thought, well, maybe he can show up in me as well. So I like this story a lot. I've never taught it before. And you want to learn something, you want to learn about something, you go try to teach it and you learn a bunch about it. So this is the story of Jesus showing grace to somebody. This is the story of how the acceptance of someone comes before the expected obedience. Acceptance precedes obedience. Jesus isn't going to wait for Zacchaeus to get his life right before he accepts him. We have way too much of a culture that exists within church that has this unrealistic expectation of, well, once I get my life right, once I get these things organized, then I can come to God. And that's just not how it works. That's not how grace works. So I want to lead with that. I want you to know this whole frame is that God accepts you as you are, and then obedience follows. And obedience follows joyfully, not out of obligation. So here's how it goes. Jesus has just finished raising Lazarus from the dead. Remember that story? Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus comes out and take his grave clothes off, for he stinketh. And so this guy was raised from the dead. That's the kind of news that travels. So people had heard about this. He is on his way from the Sea of Galilee area down into Jerusalem for the last week of his life. He's going to be crucified a week to 2 weeks from this moment. And he's just on his way. They walked. And so there's so many stories and interactions that take place in the walk from Galilee to Jerusalem. And you look at the chapter above, Jesus heals a blind beggar in 1835. This was one where he says, what do you want me to do for you? And he says, will you restore my sight? And so he restores his sight. This guy is able to see for the first time. The story before that was the rich young ruler. The guy who shows up to him and says, what do I have to do to follow you? I've kept all the commandments. He says, sell everything you have and follow after me. It's like, no, I'm not. And he turned away sad, for he owned very much. So there's all these stories that just exist as he's passing through. There's going to be a few things that you can write down if you want, but there's going to be 5 of them. And the first one I want you to know comes out of this first verse. Look for those who need Jesus as you pass through. It's going to be a rare day that someone shows up to your Bible study and that's the first time they ask you about getting to know Jesus when you're all prepared and ready. Most of it's going to happen while you're passing through, during the 20-minute lunch break that you have, or on your way to drop your kid off at school. There's these moments where like, oh, we're doing this now? You've had those moments where like, this is a big deal and it's happening right now. Okay, I guess I should be ready. Yeah. As much as you can, be ready and answer as best you can. But Jesus did a lot of ministry as he was passing through. And for Zacchaeus, he's about to meet, in verse 2, behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. We're going to spend a little bit of time here. So Zacchaeus comes from a Hebrew word called Zacchaeus, which means pure. So if you know somebody named Zach, you got the inside scoop on their name, pure or righteous. And Zacchaeus was not pure or righteous. So if you're a Hebrew and you hear his name, it's funny. It's like a big guy named Tiny, or something like that. Like, that doesn't fit you. You're a terrible person, yet your name is righteous. So he was unliked, and not because he was small. I mean, his whole life he's been looked down on physically because he's small. But now people look down on him because he is morally bankrupt, while physically quite wealthy. Zacchaeus is the answer. If you're looking for the trivia answer someday when you're on Jeopardy, who was the richest man that Jesus interacted with in the New Testament? Zacchaeus was your guy. So we all like talking about taxes in church, right? Yay, let's go for it. So Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector, all right? So in the pyramid scheme that is Roman taxes, he was the guy who sat on top of the pyramid. He had a bunch of tax collectors underneath him, middle managing tax collectors, and every time one of them gathered taxes from people, he got a cut. The way it worked in Rome is you would subcontract out tax collector work. So you say, hey, this city Jericho, which was like the jewel of the Fertile Crescent, it was like one of the nicest cities. That's why they kept on rebuilding it. This isn't the same Jericho that was there when Joshua walked around and knocked it down with trumpets and screaming. If you don't know that story, go read the book of Joshua. It's really cool. And all those walls fell down, right? So they had to rebuild the city, which you weren't supposed to do. There was a curse on whoever rebuilt that city. A guy rebuilds it, his first son dies, and the city goes on to prosper. So this is that city. Jesus, I find it cool that Jesus is walking through the same city that he pushed the walls down on a few years, 1,000 years earlier. And he's through this city, and Jericho was a very wealthy city because of its location, because of how fertile the ground was. So it was good to be a chief tax collector, but he was the chief tax collector in the richest city in the area. And the way Rome said, the way they would contract out tax collecting work, they would say, here's what we need. We need to get this much money from every family. Whatever you get on top of that, feel free. Extort away. However much money you want to take from families is really up to your corrupt heart. And he did. They did plenty of corrupt taking. So if they came to your house, they would knock on your door and say, we need $1,000 in Roman taxes. But what we're going to take from you is $2,500. And you say, well, that's not fair. Like, we don't care. It's that or go to prison. So you would pay the $2,500 and just be crazy bitter. Like, nobody likes paying taxes anyways, but you kind of get it. We need roads, we need infrastructure, all that stuff. But you're just straight stealing. And he was the chief of all of the thieves. Here's how Jesus, this isn't somebody else's opinion of tax collectors. This is Jesus. By the way, if you're a tax collector, we have no assumption this is you as long as you're not stealing. So please don't come after me. Matthew chapter 18. Matthew 18 is this chapter on church discipline. And so it says, if you go to somebody and you address their sin, they're like, I don't care, then go to them with two people, and if they're like, I don't care, then you take them to the church. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. Matthew 18:17. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let that person be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Jesus is saying, hey, you know how we all hate tax collectors? That's how you should treat this guy if he doesn't turn from his wicked ways. So there's this general understanding of how tax collectors are disliked and hated. And in fact, he when he's instructing people in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, how to love, he's talking about loving your enemies, which is a really bold thing to say. And he says, Matthew 5:46, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Again, saying, you know those tax collectors that are terrible, we all agree they're terrible, even they love those who love them. So what makes that special for you? Loving your enemies is what takes you to that next step up. There really is an understanding that these are the worst sort of people. And because everybody has their money stolen from them by these people. So I didn't have enough food to eat last night, and you're throwing away a meal's worth of food because you got full, because you took my money. And my kids can't eat, and you're tossing away leftovers. So these are bad guys. And in fact, Jesus has while he understands how the culture thinks, he also understands these people need Jesus, like Matthew of the book of Matthew is a tax collector. He's walking by Matthew's booth, and he says, follow after me. And Matthew just puts down his ledger and goes, like, all right. And he leaves work and follows Jesus. And I don't know if there's actually more to that conversation. I want to actually see how that went down, because I get the feeling that there's more conversation that gives context to some of these, but because it says at the end of the book of John that if we wrote down everything Jesus did, it would fill all the books in all of the world. So it tells me that there's a lot more that went on than what we have privy to, but we have the parts that we need. So Matthew, who was a lower level tax collector, is one of his disciples. He wrote one of the books. So this is what Zacchaeus does. Look at verse 3. He was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small in stature. Sometimes it's hard to see what's going on in front of you when a big crowd shows up. You ever try to go see a celebrity? Maybe you've taken your children or grandkids to Disney World before, and you try to see that parade that goes by. And unless you staked your claim like 2 hours ahead of time and just wasted 2 hours at Disney World sitting in the sun so that you could see a parade, you're probably not going to be in the front row. Which means all you get to see is Cinderella twirling around on the top of the float instead of Peter Pan dancing in the street. Right? Is that? Okay. I have little kids, so it's all right. If you aren't in the front of the parade, it can be hard to see sometimes. And so, especially if you're short. If you're short, you're stuck. There's no parade for you. So, ideally, here's what I would like to think. I would like to think that if you're the general populace who knows Zacchaeus, oh, he's the worst, and you see Jesus coming, he's the best, perhaps we should invite him? Introduce. We should introduce the best to the worst so that he can make him less worse. And so we would make room. And plus he's short, so you can see over him. So it's like why you put your kids at the front, so that way you can just see over him. And so you put Zacchaeus up to the front. Let him be a part of it. But no, they hate Zacchaeus. He stays in the back. We're not making room for you. We want to see Jesus. Here's number 2 you can write down. Make it easy for people to see Jesus. If I could word it in the negative, don't make it hard for people to see Jesus. Make it easy. Are there things in your life that people have to overlook in order to see the Jesus in you? Like, we all have something, but at least if you know your things that get in the way of people seeing Jesus in your life, can you be quick to repent of those, quick to apologize, quick to forgive? If you're those things, people can accept that you're not perfect. When you harbor the bitterness and the unforgiving heart and stuff like that, that's hard for people to overlook. If you care, I'm not pointing anybody out, so if this hits you, it's Jesus, not me. If you care more about your political party than you do about Jesus, and people have to overlook your just tidal wave of political opinions in order to see the Jesus that you represent, you got to tone it down, son. If you care more about your team and all you ever talk about is that, like, I get it, sports are fun, so it's okay. But if that's all they ever hear from you and they have to overlook that to see the Jesus in you, that's not okay. Make it easy for people to see Jesus. Give them easy access to that. And that doesn't mean you come in swinging Bibles. It means you come in and you just throw out little seeds for spiritual conversation. What'd you do on Sunday? So that they might come back to you with, what did you do on Sunday? So that you can tell them you went to church. I learned about a guy named Zach. He was the worst. Then he became the best. Anyways, make it easy for people to see Jesus. Finding celebrities in the middle of crowds has always been a thing. If there would have been paparazzi days, then there would have been cameras and stuff there. I don't know if you ever tried to go see a celebrity, if you tried to sneak in to try to get access to it. Way back in the year 2000, when George W. Bush was running for president, it was him and Al Gore. That was all that was left. And he was coming to the hospital that I was working at. I was valet parking cars in college. And so I'd done that for a few years, and he was coming to visit the cancer center because the year 2000, there was this really divisive political election. Like we've seen those. But this one had a bunch of hanging chads before everything got digital, and it was weird, and people got upset. And so George Bush, the I-4 corridor is a big deal. I went to college in Orlando, and so you had to capture Florida. Florida was a big deal. He came to visit some cancer patients. And we didn't know this when we showed up to work. We just showed up to work, and so they shut down the valet. And so we're like, all right, let's see if we can catch a glimpse of this guy, George W. Bush. And so, of course, the Secret Service is there, and so we had to find a secret way around them. And so we were the ones responsible for pushing wheelchairs and stuff, so we knew all the ins and outs in the corridors of the hospital up there. And so we said, the one place he has to go was through the lobby of this cancer center. And they wouldn't let us in, so we went through the back door. There's this special staircase you can take back to an alley through the back of the kitchen, and then you can show up right in the back entrance to the lobby. And it worked. And there was me and a buddy, and we showed up, and sure enough, there in the lobby was about half the width of this sanctuary, and so there was about 3 Secret Service guys, and they had guns, hands on the guns, earpiece in, and we're like, dude, they got guns. We whispered so that we wouldn't be heard. And then and we waited, and that should have been like a we should probably go moment, but instead we were 20 and interested. So 21. And so we walk up, and so George Bush starts coming out, and so we go up in between the security guards, kind of act like we're staff members because we have sort of uniforms on. And try to hide the valet thing. Anyways, and so George Bush is walking by, and we're like, and he goes, and like that's a real thing. He gave us the one finger, yeah, this is cool. And so we made eye contact, and it was really cool. And that was, but it took some sneaking around. It took some effort because people didn't want us to have that kind of access to somebody who was so important. And this is kind of the move that Zacchaeus had to pull because he's small in stature and he wants to see Jesus, but he can't. Now listen, to understand this blobby image doesn't quite do it justice. Zacchaeus is showing up in his full work gear. He's a chief tax collector. Whatever the 3-piece suit is at the time, that's what he's wearing. And verse 4 happens. He ran on ahead, climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. There's a couple things here. You don't often see people in full work garb running, like grown men, tax collectors, running to a parade, and then shimmying up a tree in their 3-piece suit. That's not normal. And because adults don't typically climb trees, because if you're 8 years old and you fall out of a tree, like you have to write with your other hand for 6 weeks in class, and then you're good. And plus, you're more pliable. But as adults, you realize that there's a lot of people's jobs that if you fall out of a tree and break something, you don't have a job anymore, so you got to be more careful. And this is kind of the place where Zacchaeus was, but he was he had to see Jesus. I have to just see him. That was all he hoped for. What happens is so far beyond what he was hoping for. All he was hoping is to be able to see him. Because if any of these rumors are true, I need to know that he carries himself in such a way. Now listen, there was a lot of, if you were Caesar and you're driving by, you expected parades, so you'd be in a chariot that set you up about 5 or 6 feet. That way everybody could see you. Put yourself on display. Not Jesus. Jesus isn't Caesar. He's a man of the people. He comes down to where we're at. He doesn't try to raise himself up so that everybody can see him. He allows himself to be among us. And so Zacchaeus shimmies up a tree. And when Jesus comes to this place in verse 5, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. This is really cool. He sees Zacchaeus, and I want you to see how he does this. When Jesus comes to that place, he looked up. And just that phrase alone carries so much, because this guy, his entire life, he's been looked down on physically. And then he engages in some moral behavior that everybody's not just looking down on him physically, they look down on him morally. But they can't stop him. And if they could, they would, but they know they can't because he's a Roman official. This guy, Zacchaeus, was the kind of guy that he was a Jewish guy. So when Rome comes in and takes over Israel, he joins the team of Rome to get money from his people. He's a traitor and he steals. He is unliked. And so for somebody to look up at him, somebody of the stature of Jesus, to look up, that's a big deal. He looked up at him and says to him, Zacchaeus. He knows his name. How does he know my name? I assure you, if I'm in the lobby of that hospital and George Bush goes, hey, Travis, like, what do you know? What should I know? And this is what it is for Jesus, and he does know, so that's got to be even more scary. If you do know, that's really bad for Zacchaeus. He looks up at him and says, Zacchaeus. And in that moment, what he says from that point on changes everything. His tone of voice changes everything. You must come down here. I will stay at your house tonight. Or, Zacchaeus, you must come down. I will stay at your house tonight. These are very different things. So that one word, Zacchaeus, this could really go either way. If he knows what I know, and he probably does, I am in deep. Because what if he looks up and says, Zacchaeus, I know you, your whole name is out here, everybody knows now that you're trapped in that tree, here's what's going to happen. The reason why his family didn't eat last night is because of you. The reason why they don't have a house is because of you. You've stolen from everybody here, and you're going to hang from that tree. He could have. Wouldn't that have been just? Wouldn't that have been fair? There would have been cheers coming from the crowd. You want to hear the support of a crowd that's following Jesus. Justice has come to the evil Roman who deserves it. That traitor Jew who joined teams with Rome. But no. I want to come to your house. I must stay at your house today. Today. The sovereignty of God knows the day of your salvation. He says, I know your name. I know when you're going to get saved. I know your name because that name has been written in my book of life since before I said in the beginning. It's been there because of this day. It's all going to change for you, Zacchaeus. Here's the thing I want you to hear. You can write this one down too, number 3. Write down the word ask, seek, knock. There's a verse in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7. It says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. Jeremiah 29:13 says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. What sort of God responds with grace to a guy who is completely, unequivocally undeserving? It's this kind of God. Zacchaeus is seeking after this Jesus. What if these rumors are true? What if he can really forgive me? What if he is anything like what people have said? I have a chance. And maybe that's you. Maybe the only reason why you're here is because maybe somebody dragged you here. Maybe you're here because you're the seeker and you're saying, I don't know if this is true, but I really, really want it to be true. But it seems too good to be true. Yeah, welcome to church. This is why we keep a cross back here on our wall. Because the whole thing is unfair. Because he died so that we could live. He took our death, he gave us his life. That's what Zacchaeus is hoping for. That's what Jesus offers him. He accepts Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus hasn't done anything yet. All he's done is seek after Jesus. He hasn't cleaned himself up yet. He hasn't done anything to recompense people for his mess. And yet Jesus says, I want to hang out with you. Hurry down. And so verse 6, so he hurried down. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. Isn't this the way you respond to grace? This is how it looks when you receive grace. You respond with joy. This is why we sing worship songs. This is why there aren't a lot of songs for atheists. Because there's not a whole lot to celebrate. We're born, we live, we die, we turn to dirt. That's not worth celebrating. The fact that we have hope, the fact that there is a reason for our existence, that we have that basis on something true, that is why we sing. Because we know us. I know me, and I know I don't deserve grace, and yet he gives it anyway. That's the sort of thing that inspires a song. Yet, verse 7 also exists. When they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Now it sounds right. It all did kind of sound like a fairy tale, too good to be true story. This is why I like the Bible, because it's honest in its assessment of humanity. And he just says, when they saw it, they all grumbled. And to be honest about my humanity, I would probably have been a grumbler. Listen, I did get here 2 hours early to the parade, all right? I didn't disrespect the whole environment by shimmying up the tree. Like, can't you just be a normal adult and elbow your way in? Like, you don't do that. And I've behaved myself. He's the worst. I'm at least average. I haven't done that bad, I think. You ever use that excuse? I'm not that bad. And this guy is. So why did you invite yourself to his house? Yeah, he has a better house, but I've done right. He stole from me. Come bless me. You ever get angry when somebody else receives grace? Because you don't understand, though. They don't deserve it as much as I didn't. I mean, I know I didn't deserve it either, but they don't deserve it even worse. Isn't that a weird argument? But it totally seems valid in your head. Like, the grace I received was different because at least I was trying. He's not even trying. So this is where we land a lot of times. So you can write this down, number 4. Don't grumble when a person receives grace. We're that person too. So don't grumble when somebody receives grace. That word grumble is an onomatopoeia, so it sounds like what it is. And in Hebrew, it sounds even more like what it is, but I can't pronounce it, so we're just going to, the grumble word works in English too. So grumble sounds like grumble. If you say the word grumble in low tones, it's grumble, 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 grumble. And it's like, he doesn't deserve it, he's the worst, and here I am saying I got to the parade early, got my kids, and the whole thing is here, and now this guy gets blessed. What did I even show up for? It's that kind of attitude, right? It's terrible. Nobody likes that person, and apparently including Jesus. No, he does. That's not true. I'm not going to fill his... Anyways, so look at verse 8. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord," by the way, can we just stop there? Right there, he's 2 words in to having heard Jesus invite himself to his house, and he already is calling him Lord. Capital L, Lord. You are Lord of my life right now. How quick does the switch flip for somebody to get saved? Now. So much so, listen to how he's going to respond. The half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Listen, I've taken a lot. I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. Not half of what I'm going to make from now on. I will give half of everything I own to the poor. And I often wonder, this is my conjecture, so I'm just going to put this out there. That word if seems big to me in the last half of that. If I have defrauded anyone of anything, I'll restore it fourfold. I think a lot of times when we get ourselves into, especially the sin of a lifestyle, when they were accusing him, saying he went to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. That word sinner means like professional. He is a lifestyle sinner, like a professional sinner. He sins as an identity. They would use this of prostitutes, like you are identified by your sinful lifestyle and profession. They use this of tax collectors because their profession is so associated with sin. And so he looks, this guy, I think to get yourself there, you have to make some moral compromises and justifications, because you can't, it's hard for us to go like diving into sin. We have to convince ourselves that somehow it's going to be worth it. We deserve this. It's not as bad as it seems. Fill in the blank with your justification. And then you're there. So the fact that he's saying if tells me that he's trying to he's starting to see some clarity behind his own justifications. Like, if I have defrauded anyone, I will repay them back fourfold. And I have to think, if you're sitting in the crowd like, oh, if? Yeah, everybody is part of your if. The weird thing is, the chapter before, he had told the rich young ruler, give everything you own to the poor. And what did that guy say? No. I can't, I have too much. He went away sad. Because when you're told to do something, that's the essence of the law. Like, you have to do this in order to be obedient to the call. That can be really hard to do out of the obligation to the law. But when you respond to grace, Jesus doesn't tell him to do any of this stuff. It's just the response of someone who has received the grace that only God can give. So he just puts it out there. And this fourfold thing is interesting because in the Old Testament, so this guy knew his Old Testament. Here were the rules. Your Old Testament rules were, if I steal something from you, if I steal $100 from you, I get convicted, I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. I have to pay you back 20%. So I would give you $120 back. But if I stole it with violence, then I had to give 200% back. So I had to give you $200. But if what I stole from you, it says in Exodus 22, if I steal from you your ox or your sheep, like the thing that makes you money, if I steal the thing that makes you money, I have to pay you back fourfold. I have to pay you back $400 if that thing is what you used as your income. Does that make sense? So he skips right to the end. And he says, again, most of us, when we think, okay, how can I make this right with the least amount of cost to me? So we're good with 120%, right? Everybody, we're cool with that? And they probably would have been. But he skips right to the fourfold. Listen, I know my Old Testament. I'm going to go ahead and pay out the most I have to pay because I don't deserve any of this. I've done really bad. This is how fast it can take. It can take as long as it takes to shimmy down a sycamore tree to change from being an extortionist to somebody who gives back fourfold all that he's stolen. And can you imagine those conversations? Because if you're the guy in the crowd, you're like, yeah, maybe. But if you're the guy who's sitting at home and you didn't make the parade because you're trying to have a job, and Zacchaeus comes knocking on your door, your daughter's like, Dad, it's Zacchaeus. You're like, oh, it's on now. He's back again? He's back again? What do you want? You're not taking any more money from me. You were just here last month. No, you can't have any more stuff. He's like, listen, I know. Actually, it's more like this because he's super short. He's like, listen, I know. But he says, listen, I'm the worst. I talked to, maybe you've heard of Jesus of Nazareth. I don't know if you have. I talked to Jesus of Nazareth, and he showed me that how wrong I've been. He forgave me when I didn't deserve it, and here's what I promised to him. I promised I would pay everybody back I've stolen from fourfold. So here's this bag with money sign on it. Here's this bag, and I want to give you back 4 times what I've stolen from you. I keep really good records. You can check out my records. I got them back in my office in my booth. So if you want them, you can check it out. But if it's not all here, please let me know. I'm so sorry. And if you're the one, you're like, what kind of scam is this? Am I going to get in trouble now? No, for real. This is on me. As a representative of Rome, I'm paying you back all that I've stolen from you. You notice he didn't say, I'll pay you back all of the taxes you've paid, because taxes are a normal thing that you should pay. This is everything I've stolen from you. And if you're that guy, if you're that family who receives back this really strange investment return, I got 400% of my return from the guy who stole from me. And if you're that guy, you say, who did you talk to? Jesus of Nazareth? That's a real guy? That's what causes this? I need to know that guy. And isn't that the way it goes? For one who receives grace, to distribute grace. I mean, these people were right. This isn't fair. And it's also not fair to receive 4 times back. And so now the guy who was your worst enemy is the source of you knowing who to go to for life. And no matter where you're coming from, no matter what your past is, you think, I could never make that up. Maybe not. I'm sure there were plenty of people who grabbed the bag and said, good riddance. But for some of them, that was the connection to a Jesus who, if Jesus can give back this, if he can inspire this kind of change in a mess like this guy, then I need to know that Jesus. It can be that way. Because even Jesus says to him, in verse 9, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. He says, this guy is saved. Just to be clear, he wasn't saved because he gave all the money back. He was saved when he said, behold, Lord. His heart, his actions were evidence of a change that had gone on in his heart. He doesn't give all that back and say, okay, am I free to go stealing money again? I'll steal less, I promise. That's not it. It was evidence of what had gone on in his heart by his faith. He is a son of Abraham, yeah, by his race, but that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about he's a son of Abraham. Abraham was saved by faith, and so is this man. Verse 10, he looks around at everybody else who's standing there all upset that this guy received grace, and he reminds them, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. He didn't just come to save people struggling with addiction, bad behaviors, people who steal. He came to save rich politicians. He came to save people that you thought, yeah, there's some people who are savable. Not that guy. Yeah, this guy. And one of the things I think is cool in this is the way he finishes it up. You know what he doesn't say at the end? He doesn't say, so therefore, quit your tax collecting lifestyle and sin no more. He doesn't tell him to stop collecting taxes. Just do it right. Here's the 5th thing I want you to write down. You've heard it from this stage plenty of times when Tony says it all the time. I'll say it this time. Where you are called. Some of you might be in a profession, perhaps, that is fundamentally sinful. Don't do that anymore. But most of us are in a profession that is morally neutral. What you do with that makes it either holy or unrighteous. If you're doing something within your job that lacks integrity, that is sinful, then stop doing that and do your job in a way that has integrity and honors Jesus. And that's what he's saying here. By not telling him to quit his tax collector job, he's just saying, do it the right way. You're saved now. Do it in a way that honors God. Whatever you do in word or deed, do it as unto the Lord. So, we finish with the simple, what about you? You're in one of these two spots. You are either in need of Jesus and you are asking, you are seeking, you are knocking, you're on the, I need to know what is true. And if that's you, I want you to know there is truth. This is not fairy tale. This is not mythology. These are not ancient texts to be studied merely for academic purposes. The Word of God is living and active. There is truth here. And if you want to know more, come talk to me. Talk to any of these guys who are up here praying for Jasmine. Talk to somebody who brought you. But if you ended up here, please know that you have access to eternal truth. That's a real thing. So maybe that's you, and maybe you're on the other side, that you need to be the one who represents Jesus to those who are seeking. You have people in your life that you have influence over. To what extent are you making it easy for them to see Jesus? Do you expect behavioral change before you accept them? Now we can talk about Jesus now that you stopped using cuss words. No, don't do that, please. What sort of behavioral expectations are you expecting to change before you're willing to accept someone enough to have a conversation? Jesus was going to go, this wasn't just come over for dinner. That word guest, I must be a guest at your house today, that means stay the night. We're going to get to know each other. We're going to talk long into the evening over several meals and actually know each other by the end of this. Are you able to do that? That's really hard. And I'm not pretending like this is easy. This is where the Holy Spirit had better be in the mix, because we can't do this ourselves. So if you're a seeker for truth, or if you're one who needs to be the one who gives someone the access to truth, know that the acceptance precedes the obedience. And that's what we learn from Jesus and Zacchaeus. So let me pray. God, you were the one who was there. And I'm thankful that you kept this story for us. I pray that we wouldn't stand in the way of people knowing Jesus. I pray that we would give them, by our lifestyle, by our words, by our ability to forgive and apologize, that we would represent you well. We are yours. We are to be the representatives of Christ in a world in need. We are to be, just like Jasmine was praying, the hands and feet of Jesus to a world that desperately needs to know there is an actual truth that is for them where they are. So God, meet our needs and show us you. And for those who are seeking you, God, I pray that they would see you, that you would reveal yourself in such a clear and powerful way, that they would have no other explanation but that it's you. Do that today. And do that for your glory. And it's our privilege to follow after you. It's your name we pray. Amen.